why would you not rather just spend less than $5 million more total over 2 years for Nance, who can play the 4, can play the 5, gives you more defense, gives you playmaking, gives you some interior presence that Markkanen doesn't give you? I mean, that's what I don't get.
Lauri Markkanen is going to the Cleveland Cavaliers on a 4-year, $67 million contract. The 4th year is only partially guaranteed. I think it's about $6 million guaranteed. The Cavs are sending Larry Nance Jr. to the Portland Trail Blazers, and they are sending a 2023 second-round pick via the Denver Nuggets to Chicago. That pick is protected 31 through 46, so it will only convey if it's between 47 and 60. Portland is sending Derrick Jones Jr. and a lottery-protected 2022 first-round pick to Chicago. That pick is protected through 2028, lottery-protected every year. God forbid if they miss the playoffs for 7 straight years, it will become a second-round pick. So let's start with the Cavs, since they're the ones who got Markkanen. And I feel like
I thought we should start with a team that got the best player.
The reaction on NBA Twitter when this news broke, Woj, as he want to do, tweets out the salary structure first. And even then, when I just saw 4 years, $67 million, Lauri Markkanen to the Cavs, I was already like, what the hell? And then seeing that they gave up Larry Nance and a second-round pick to sign Markkanen to this deal, that only strengthened my conviction of questioning everything they're doing, as did, I mean, that was the larger reaction from the NBA community, it seems. So what do you think? You've seen Markkanen up close for the last couple of years. What do you think of the Cavs acquiring him in general, and then the price they paid to get him?
So before I go into the analysis of it, I do want to say something in regards to that, because you know how Chicago more or less did the same thing with DeMar DeRozan, that they overpaid in trade and then they also handed him a contract that was probably above market value. The justification of doing that was now they get in a big name player that kind of lays the foundation moving forward. It's a message to the rest of the league that we can get big name players if we're the Bulls. For the Cavs, they're trying to say, well, we can get big players too, but I just wonder if Markkanen falls into that category. So if that's the mindset that the Cavaliers have gone into, basically saying, okay, we need to send a signal. We need to send a signal that we have this guy who was very hyped up for a couple of years and we can get him. Okay, I can actually see on some crazy level the justification of it. I just think there is a pretty big, substantial difference in Lauri Markkanen and DeMar DeRozan, just in terms of quality. But I will give them that benefit of the doubt, simply because I think logically it does make some sort of sense. That said, hopefully.
I was waiting for this.
Yes. But here's the thing. Everything I've heard about Lauri Markkanen from a personality perspective is good. I have not heard a bad word about Lauri Markkanen the person ever. Quite the contrary. So you're getting a high locker room guy, a high character locker room guy. That's for sure. You're getting a guy who is committed, who is a strong worker, even though he hasn't really developed. It has been because he doesn't have a high work ethic. So in that sense, it's great. It's just the on-court issues. He is so inconsistent, and it comes down to the fact that he provides you with no other positive alternatives if he's not shooting the ball well. If he comes into the game and he'll probably start, I'm assuming, because when you sign a 4-year, $67 million contract, I have to assume that you'll be starting. You can more or less tell what kind of game he's going to have after 5 minutes of him being on the court. If he's not aggressive right off the bat, you are getting one of those 3-for-9 shooting games where he's just kind of running around a little bit, trying to find open shots, and sometimes he'll can a couple threes, and that will be all she wrote. And then you have the flip side of the coin, which the Cavaliers are obviously hoping for, where he puts it all together. Where he's starting to hit from the outside, he puts the ball on the floor, he gets to the basket, he'll get a couple lobs as well, maybe even occasionally, and this does happen, but definitely not with high regularity whatsoever. He'll have a mismatch in the post, and he'll actually take advantage of it because he's 7 feet tall. This is something he routinely forgets. So I hope for the Cavs, and I hope for Markkanen that they're getting the aggressive version, a guy who does this more often than not, because in Chicago, he just stopped being that. He just started, hanging around the 3-point line, started to wait for anyone else to create for him because he's not a self-creator. And when I say put ball on the floor, as I did a moment ago, I don't mean him breaking down defenses off the dribble, creating his own shot. Like this is a situation where he's on the 3-point line, he gets a kick out, and then he puts the ball on the floor. He takes 2 or 3 strong dribbles and goes to the hole. So, it's not because he can take the ball up the court, do a double crossover and get his guy off rhythm and then go to the basket. He's not that kind of dude. And for the shooting part, I think friend of the podcast, Mark Karansulis, did something. He broke something down on Twitter, which I really like. There are a lot of people who are kind of comparing Markkanen to a Davis Bertans, and it's not if you do that, it means you haven't watched those two play. It means you're just looking at the stats, like the 3-point stats. Because what Bertans does is he kind of moves like a guard. You and I have seen Bertans a lot. The way that he catches the ball when shooting threes, that is very guard-like. Like he bends and twists his body, and he's coming off these deep screens, and he's basically a 6'10" version of JJ Redick, the way that his body moves and positions himself. Markkanen is not that. He is not a guy who will run through 17 back screens, come up on the other side of the floor, and fling his body into a jump shot. He is a standstill spot-up shooter, which means that he doesn't bend the defense all that much. So I just kind of worry a little bit with how he can affect this team, because what you need alongside Darius Garland and Colin Sexton is spacing. Also because Isaac Okoro is not yet at least a floor spacing wing. So I wonder, what can you do with Markkanen, who is a standstill shooter primarily, given that he's not one of those guys who can really bend defenses? Does that give them this advantage that they're looking for? Or are they basically just getting and follow me on this one, a 24-year-old, 32-year-old Kevin Love? If you catch what drift, they're not getting a Kevin Love for age 24, 26. They're getting somewhat current Kevin Love, maybe slightly better. Is that really going to affect anything? I have my doubts, but I would love to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I mean I think the problem with this, beyond just, as you said, they overpaid to overpay him. They overpaid in trade to overpay him contractually. You also have to take it in the perspective of what they did this entire offseason. Spending the number 3 pick on Evan Mobley.
Correct.
Giving Jarrett Allen a 5-year, $100 million contract that already raised questions about how those two guys are going to fit together.
Yes. Then
you give Markkanen into this contract, and it's okay, you've devoted so much money and resources to your front court, and we're not really sure how these guys are going to fit together or who fits best with one another. Maybe they see it as Mobley and Markkanen are our long-term front court, and we signed Allen as a stopgap while Mobley gets up to speed, and then we'll try to trade Allen later. But as we discussed when they gave Allen that contract, we don't know how much value that is going to have on the trade market, if much at all. So that is one of my concerns with this trade, or just overall offseason vision. Also, I mean, this is something they can rectify in the future, but right now their forward depth, their 3 forward depth is more small forward depth, I guess, is really questionable. It's basically Isaac Okoro and Cedi Osman, and that's it. I mean, you can feel pretty good about, you've got, Colin Sexton, Darius Garland in the backcourt. You have Ricky Rubio, at least for this season, backing them up. Maybe they're high on Dylan Windler taking a step forward, but I just don't see this move helping them, get much better in terms of their playoff positioning. I don't think this puts them not even in the tier of the Bulls or the Celtics or the Hawks or anything like that. I'm still taking the Pacers over them. I'm still taking the Wizards over them. I'm still taking Toronto over them. Like, they still feel like they're going to be the 12 or the 13th seed in the East.
Right.
So I just don't really see the vision, the overall vision here. And, we don't know what's going to happen.
Is there one? Is there a vision?
I don't know. I mean, that's part of the thing, too, is like, who are they competing against to sign Lauri Markkanen? If it's the end of August and this guy's still unsigned, maybe they saw the writing on the wall and said, this guy could just take his qualifying offer and become an unrestricted free agent next year. In which case, couldn't you have probably just had the same deal on the table? Like, are they really that desperate to get Lauri Markkanen in now that they weren't willing to just wait a year and see who else might be on the market and see if they could find a better fit than this guy?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, it could be that the Cavaliers just like him and think that there's something there, something untapped, because that is really the only explanation that I have that would make any sense for it.
Right.
Like, what I really don't get, though, is the sacrifice of Nance.
Yeah.
Because it's not like he was a free agent. Like, he had another year left on his deal after this season is like, he effectively has 2 years left. The season that we're going to go into right now or in a couple months, and then the year after, for a total of $20.3 million. Markkanen this year, and like these aren't official salary commitments yet, but I'm looking at Spotrac, which has him at roughly $15.58 million as a starting salary. Why would you not rather just spend less than $5 million more total over 2 years for Nance, who can play the 4, can play the 5, gives you more defense, gives you playmaking, gives you some interior presence that Markkanen doesn't give you? I mean, that's what I don't get. He can play 2 positions. Markkanen is a through and through 4. So if you want to say, okay, the future's Evan Mobley and Lauri Markkanen, you're once again going out with that, old school, let's have 2 bigs in the front court, which is just, it's so 5 years ago at this point. I don't understand why you would go that route. Now, if Markkanen could play center, it would be a completely different mentality. Then I would be behind it, because I think, oh, okay, then you can kind of make them interchangeable. But the Bulls try playing him at center extensively. It does not work. He cannot hold that position at all. There is just nothing there to suggest that he can be a rim protector. There's nothing there to indicate that he'll be, an impactful center in that sense, like the last line of defense, someone who can play the dunker spot. Like, no, he is a guy who hangs around the perimeter. I don't remember who said this. I think it was in the Chicago Bulls group that I'm in, basically saying Markkanen would be better if he was 6'7" than 7 feet. Like, that's what he is. He's basically Chetty Osman, but 7 feet tall.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair question. I guess he's more age aligned with Sexton, Garland, and Mobley than Larry Nance, who is 28, turning 29 in January. So that could be the one argument that favoring Lauri over Nance. But as you said at the top of the episode, Larry Nance is a better player right now than Lauri Markkanen.
Yeah.
So they gave up the better player on a cheaper contract and gave up a very heavily protected second round pick. That's who really cares about that. But even if it's just Lauri on 4 years, $67 million versus Nance on 2 years, whatever, 20 some million,
20.3,
20 points. Like, I prefer Larry Nance.
Yeah. And like, I realize that I'm being harsh on Markkanen, but again, I think these 4s, I think it's a problem that they're, again, we go back to John Collins as well, right? A guy who really can't play a whole lot of center, who just got $125 million, and he was significantly less prioritized in the playoffs offensively, which is where his primary strength is. Like, so if you lean into it, it might work. Like maybe Colby Altman and JP Biggerstaff has a meeting and just say, okay, look, we just invested $67 million in Lauri Markkanen. Let's empower him. Let's go out there and make sure that he gets at the very least 14, 15 shots per game. Because that's the mentality I want the Hawks to have with Collins. They just paid him $125 million over 5 years. You better make damn sure that, unlike in the playoffs when he took 10 shots per game over 32 minutes, that he takes a lot more. You want to lean into his strengths. Otherwise, what the hell are you paying him for? And that's what I want to see from Markkanen in Cleveland. Like, yeah, he is an offensive talent. I'm not going to sit here and say he's useless. He's not. Offensively, he is good. You just need to make sure that the situation is right for him. You need to make sure that the circumstances are right for him. And then you need to make sure that he is on the same page. Like, not just standing around. Stay aggressive all the time. If you do that, okay, fine, I'll buy it. The thing is, and you kind of alluded to it as well, we haven't seen it yet. So right now, they're banking on the upside. They're banking on everything working out. They're investing $67 million. The Hawks are investing $125 million in this old school mentality player, kind of flipping that switch and going, yeah, we can do all these things that we get paid to. We can certainly live up to our contracts. I'm not as sure. And if Hawks fans love the Collins contract, more power to you. And if Cavaliers fans love the Markkanen contract, again, more power to you. But I am definitely skeptical of that type of archetype of player working in the NBA in 2021.
Yeah, the Cavs fans that I follow on Twitter, at least, all seem very underwhelmed by this move. Yes. So I don't think we have to worry about infuriating Cavs fans. I think they are mad enough on their own right now.
Right.
So let's go to Portland now, since we've been talking about Larry Nance.
Yes.
You named them as the possible winner of this trade.
Yes.
So why do you feel that way?
Because they finally have a big who isn't robotic. And I'm not saying that Yusuf Nurkic isn't good, but Nurkic is very robotic. He's not a fluent shooter. Like, he does need to play under a certain set of rules before he's really effective. Nance comes in and is just like this all-around big. He gives them something that they haven't had for at least 5 years. I don't think Dame has ever had this versatile a big to ever play with. And I realize the name Larry Nance Jr. isn't sexy. I realize that he's not an all-star. I realize he's not an all-NBA guy, all of that. But this is a guy who comes in. He can shoot the ball. He can get to the basket because he's also athletic as hell. He can rebound and he can pass, Bryan. He can really pass. You can put him in pick and roll situations from outside the three-point line. You can pick him in pick and pop situations. You can play him in short rolls. You can play him in the dunker spot. He is just so damn versatile that Dame and CJ finally have this very flexible 4/5 guy who can come in and do all sorts of weird things. Like, no longer will the ball necessarily have to stick in Damon or CJ's hands. Like, you can pass the ball to Nance and tell him, go get us a shot, go create for someone else, do weird stuff because it works. He is good. And this just, to me, is such a wonderful and tremendous upgrade for them that they've needed for so long. And also, and I should have written about it. I wrote about the trade for Forbes, and I didn't bring this up because I was going a little bit long. I think the acquisition of Nance Jr. to Portland is going to unlock Robert Covington. I think that might fix Robert Covington because there's going to be so much gravity around the pick and roll of Dame and Nance or CJ and Nance and all of that. Rob is going to be able to just run around. He is able to fly under the radar in that segment. And he can just spot up all he wants. I think ultimately Nance could be a guy that unlocks the entire offensive system in Portland and takes them up a tier, which is what they've been looking for. Now, does that mean that the Blazers are championship contenders? No, I'm not saying that. But I think they got better. I think they got drastically better, and it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if they are a full-on locked-in playoff team that actually avoids the play-in tournament altogether, because this is a good upgrade, a good solid upgrade. They got the best player in the entire trade.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree that short-term, they are the big winners of this trade. Like, if we are looking at it just this year alone, this I totally agree. This makes them better. And, I think Larry Nance Jr. flies it under the radar because he's been playing for a bad Cavaliers team that most people haven't been watching for the last couple of years. But Larry Nance Jr. is genuinely good. And, he is the exact type of role player that all good teams need. He's going to look better in Portland than he did even in Cleveland, I think, because he's going to be surrounded by better talent and he can, fill in those gaps wherever needed. You talked about the versatility and flexibility of him. That also unlocks some versatility and flexibility for the whole team. Now, last year, their starting five, especially after the Norman Powell trade, they have been running this back all offseason about how they had one of the best net ratings with Dame, CJ, Powell, Covington, and Nurkic, and that's great. But as soon as those guys stepped off the floor and it was Carmelo and Enes Kanter as their backup front court, they just started bleeding points, just absolutely hemorrhaging points. So now you replace that with Larry Nance Jr. and Cody Zeller, and I feel better about them being able to break even. You now have a backup unit with Anthony Simons. We have Nasir Little still there. We have Ben McLemore, Tony Snell, Derrick Jones Jr., Cody Zeller. Like, they go a legit 10, 11 deep now. Even if Simons and Little are still a little rough around the edges and still need to grow into their games a little bit, you can hope for some internal improvement there just because those two guys are young, and really that's your only hope for internal improvement at this point.
I think that is fair. Yeah.
But now you can run out lineups with a Jones Covington front court. Like, they were just so traditional. If you had either Nurkic or Kanter, like, you had to play just a traditional five. And Kanter is great offensively, great on the glass, just a god awful defender, especially in pick and rolls. If you have Nance and Covington, that's a really intriguing small ball five unit.
Yeah.
So that's something that they just did not have the ability to do last year. And then we can, get crazy, put Nance with Nurkic or put Nance and Zeller together. Like, there are so many different combinations of players they can try out now that they just did not have the luxury. They were just so top heavy and thin last year. Now I feel better about their overall team construct. That the only thing that gives me pause here is still just the Dame situation. Like, we don't know, all of the jokes up until this trade, and Dan Devine of The Ringer wrote about it earlier this week, was like, okay, Dame said, we got to put pressure on the front office. We need to show that we are committed to winning now. And they went out and signed Tony Snell and Ben McLemore and Cody Zeller, who are fine depth players, but they didn't change Portland's overall standing in the West.
Right.
And I don't think that Nance does either. I agree with you that this hopefully cements them as a top 6 team in the West and that they can avoid the play-in, but I still don't think they're a legit threat to win the West, or even if they do, even if, we have the same cascade of injuries that happened this past year and they're the last team standing, I don't see any way they're beating Brooklyn or Milwaukee in the NBA Finals if it comes to that point. So that, with Dame still, did this appease him enough to say, okay, I'm, forget everything I said this offseason where I'm hinting I'm disgruntled, like, I'm committed here long term.
Right.
If that's the case, that's fine. But I just hesitate giving up any draft picks right now if I'm Portland, not knowing exactly what's going to happen with Dame. Because God forbid you miss the playoffs this year and then he requests out. And now you've got this draft pick that you owe dangling over your heads. And maybe you don't have to give it up for a couple of years, because without Dame, maybe you decide to trade him for a picks and prospect package instead of, Ben Simmons plus stuff that keeps us competitive. Right. But either way, that's one fewer thing that you're going to have to rebuild around. And as I just mentioned, the cupboard is already pretty barren in terms of young players who you hope can be, if you're looking ahead post Dame, regardless of when that happens, there just isn't much there. And now you've taken away one potential future asset as well. So I like the trade for them. I really do. And I do think this makes them better, but I still worry about the long-term vision, right? Like, I know they are committed to building around Dame and keeping him there, but it isn't totally their say. And I worry that they are focusing so much on appeasing him now that they're just going to make their long-term future even worse, which we've discussed earlier this offseason with all of these guys heading into contract years as well. Like I still just can't help but feel this offseason was the natural pivot point, and that they will grow to regret not doing it a couple of years down the road.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. I know I'm going to piss off all of Portland fans again because I keep working on it, but
I think it's a fair analysis. What I'm sitting here with the feeling left here is you're right that the cupboard is bare, and when I look at the roster, I'm just wondering, where did it all go? Like, Dame wasn't a guy who cost you assets to get in the first place. Neither was CJ. Those guys were drafted. So if you're spending picks and if you're spending money, where the hell did it all go to for the external upgrades? What do you have to show for it?
Covington cost 2 firsts.
2 picks, right? Exactly, yeah.
And then did Nurkic cost? No, they got a pick with Nurkic, I think, right?
I actually don't remember, but that only makes the situation worse then, because then they would have had more assets to get better. My point is merely, when you look at the Blazers right now, clearly they didn't make the right moves, because you wouldn't be in the situation with a bare cupboard if you built the right team around Dame and CJ, who were original draft picks. So, like, this is just a tough situation all around. If they hit on the Larry Nance thing, if he comes in and unlocks some things, great. If Greg Brown or Anthony Simons or Nasir Little hits, great. But as it stands right now, they just don't have a whole lot to show for anything that they've done over the past, half decade.
Yeah, I could tell you, I just looked at their draft page on Basketball Reference, and I can tell you where they did not have picks in 2014 and 2016, and I don't remember who they traded for 6 years ago. So 2017, they traded 15 and 20 to move up to 10 to take Zach Collins.
Yeah. That'll do it. That'll be one of the things.
Yeah. So they had Simons and Little. They didn't have second round picks in 2018 or 2019. 2020 got sent. It was number 16. That was one of the picks that went for Covington. That was Isaiah Stewart. So
that's not great.
No. Yeah. But I mean, again, I am very bullish on this move for what it means for them next year. I don't want that to be misconstrued. I think they got the best player in the trade. I think this makes them better. It's really just a short-term versus long-term thing for me. But that leads us into Chicago, who I actually think might be the biggest long-term winners of this deal, Mort, because they turned Lauri Markkanen, who they did not have any interest in retaining, whether this offseason as a restricted free agent or if he took the qualifying offer. Next offseason, he was going to be an unrestricted free agent. He was almost certainly going to leave. They turn him into a lottery-protected first-round pick.
Yes.
They turn him into a second-round pick from Denver that, heavily protected, but could end up conveying in the 47 to 60 range. And it's not going to have much value, but teams do find value. I mean, Sharif Cooper was just the 48th pick in this year's draft and immediately looks like a draft day steal. So, you can occasionally find some diamonds in the rough down there.
Don't remind Bulls fans of that, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hell, every other team aside from Atlanta should be upset about that one.
Yeah.
And then you get a flyer on Derrick Jones Jr., who's only 24 years old. He fell out of the rotation in Portland last year, but he's now playing with great passers in Lonzo and Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic. Yes. I'm not going to write this guy off as being a contributor, and the Bulls aren't going to ask him to start like Blazers did. He's going to come off the bench, play 15 minutes a game, and he should be fine in that role. Yeah.
So this is where you're asking me about my opinion on the matter, because you more or less just said it right there.
Fair enough. I think I would hope that it at least causes some reflection on the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade, because I know there is a lot of backlash about how much the Bulls paid to get him, not just the contract itself, but giving up Thad, giving up the first round pick. Now knowing that they turned Markkanen into Derrick Jones Jr. in a lottery protected first round pick, they effectively broke even on that specific segment of the DeMar DeRozan trade. So it's like you basically traded Lauri Markkanen for the right to, overpay DeMar DeRozan, which is a lot better than what it looked like
Young,
at first.
To be fair.
Right, but you're getting Derrick. I'm saying like Derrick Jones Jr. in the first round pick for Thad in the first round pick almost breaks even.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like I know Thad's better at the moment, but it's close enough that you recouped a lot of the value you lost in the trade aspect of the sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan.
Correct. I think the issue is like if you put everything Chicago did over the course of the summer up in one big ass move, they come out as clear winners of that one trade. But it's just like the individual DeMar DeRozan trade that is really being dramatized over a lot. I think the Bulls came into this with a clear mission of wanting to recoup one of those first round picks. They got it. I think there's a good chance that it will convey, because what are the odds that the Blazers are going to miss the playoffs from next year and on to and including 2028? It seems unlikely. So I like it. And the thing with Derrick Jones Jr. is, I'll be honest and say that I was significantly higher on him, 12 months ago than I am now. In part because he never really broke through in Portland. Like I had him as one of the guys on my short list for MIP last year, for example. I think there's a lot there, but he just kind of stagnated. He wasn't really evolving offensively. Defensively, he's unfortunately a little bit overrated, I think. But hell, look, circumstances, they matter. Maybe he comes into a Chicago team where he like you said, where he isn't planned on, playing 25 minutes per game, where he's like playing 12, 15 minutes a game, and he's getting told over the course of these next 15 minutes, or whatever kind of minutes you get, we are only going to give you like 3 job descriptions, and that's that. Maybe that's what actually propels him forward. Maybe he can be a quote unquote star in that kind of role. We'll see. And if not, Bryan, that's an expiring contract of $9.7 million that you can package with, well, let's workshop it. You can package it with Kobe White and an additional first round draft pick. Maybe the one that the Bulls just got, the 2022 draft pick from Portland. Then you can go out and say, well, we're looking for an upgrade. Maybe you find some sort of big, like 4 or 5 combo man who can come in and actually play a substantial minutes at that position, who can make you a strong candidate to advance in the playoffs. Like, I don't know. We'll see. But it's just the fact that they have options now. Like, we were talking about the Portland Trailblazers not having a whole lot left in the cupboard. That we said the same thing about the Bulls, and now they just kind of restocked it a little bit. Not to the point where, they're the process Sixers or anything, of course.
Right.
But they have something to work with now. And they still maintain their own draft picks in the year that they aren't sending to Orlando and to San Antonio, for example, so they can still make those draft picks, and then you can trade them afterwards. Like, I don't think Chicago is as asset barren as a lot of people are making them out to be.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, because it's not like Zach LaVine is super old here. I mean, he's
26.
26, yeah, and Caruso is 27. Kobe, is 21, right?
Yeah, I think so. Let me look it up. I'm pretty sure he is. I think
he turns
2000.
22 in February, and then Patrick Williams just turned 20. Like,
he just turned 20 the other day,
2 days ago. Yeah. So it's not. And hell, Troy Brown Jr. as well is only 22.
21. 22. Yeah.
Yeah. So
right.
So I mean Simonovic, who I know you've been talking up this offseason as well.
Yeah, he had a rough time in summer league. I have to be fair.
Okay, so maybe all right. But and Tony Bradley as well. I mean, like, this is not a Portland situation where it's like we have Anthony Simons and we have Nasir Little and we are out after that. Like, there is a lot of talent here in the early to mid 20s that, a Portland in particular doesn't have. Hell, even Io, the second round pick this year as well. So
Io Dosunmu,
yeah. So no, I think I would not call the Bulls. I mean, in terms of draft picks, yes, but the Bulls, what they did this offseason, bringing in Lonzo, Caruso, DeRozan, and now Derrick Jones Jr., they're not in asset acquisition mode. Like, they made their moves. They might have to reshuffle some pieces around, but this was their summer of big splashes. This was their summer that Atlanta had last year, where they added Gallinari and Capella at the trade deadline, Bogdanovic. So this is the summer that's supposed to propel them into at least where Atlanta was, number 5 seed last year. And I think it could and probably will, because you tweeted out after the trade became, I don't know if it's even official yet, even when it broke yesterday,
right?
You tweeted out their potential depth chart now.
Yeah. And
when you look at it, is Lonzo, LaVine, DeRozan, Patrick Williams, Vucevic starting 5, which is pretty damn strong on paper. Then you go to the bench and it's Caruso, Kobe White, Troy Brown Jr., Derrick Jones Jr., and Tony Bradley.
Yes. I don't know why people are saying that's a bad lineup. I had a troll that I ended up blocking, basically saying that's trash. Like, how is that trash? I mean, I understand it's not like the 2018, 2017 Raptors when they could just go like 12 deep. I get that. But like, Tony Bradley, from a statistical perspective, is extremely productive. I mean, in limited minutes. Then you have Derrick Jones Jr. Yeah, okay, fair. Like, he is a question mark, but he is athletic. He can run. He's an improving shooter, although he will never be a good shooter in my opinion. There's some defensive upside. Then you go to Troy Brown Jr., who can handle the ball, who can pass, who's a strong rebounder, who can really set the table. You have Kobe, who's just a straight bucket getter. I mean, he could come in that second unit and just absolutely get the green light to shoot. And then you have Alex Caruso, one of the best point of attack defenders in the entire NBA. I don't think that's a bad second unit. I honestly think, Bryan, that second unit is better than some of the starting lineups that the Bulls threw out before Zach LaVine, like when they were piecing together like some sort of weird rotation with Denzel Valentine and like Ryan Arcidiacono.
Yeah,
we have to look at what the Bulls had and what they have now. No longer will the Bulls have to rely on Ryan Arcidiacono and Denzel Valentine. That's a win in and of itself.
Right. I was about to say, when you mentioned Kobe, the first thing that came to mind is this guy's going to be in the 6th man of the year conversation. And I immediately went to FanDuel to check the odds, and lo and behold, he is tied with Derrick Rose for the 3rd best odds for 6th man of the year this year.
You know,
I know it's your favorite award.
Yeah. Points, man. Yay, points. Well, no, but here's the thing. Why not Alex Caruso, if you catch my drift? If he's one of the best point of attack defenders in the entire NBA, why not him? Why isn't he on there, right?
He is on there. He's a little lower. He's at plus 5,500, tied with just Doug McDermott, Brandon Clark, Mitchell Robinson, Grayson Allen, Kelly Olynyk, which is he not going to start?
I think he's going to start. I also think McDermott is going to start, right?
Yeah. Luke Kennard, Rodney Hood, Lou Williams, all in that range.
Regardless, I appreciate that FanDuel actually has him there in that conversation, because I'm not going to go down that road again.
Ultimately, we're going to do an awards pod before the start of the season.
We're probably going to do a few, if I know you're right. No, but I like it. I think it's a solid second unit. I mean, hell, look, if we even go a little bit further with the youth, right? You brought up Marko Simonovic and all these guys. Like, even if you go to the third unit, where you have Marco, you have Devon Dotson. Granted, he's on a 2-way, but we'll see. And you have Io. Like, there's some potential there. Like, are they good right now? No. Could they be good in the future? Absolutely. Could one of those guys turn into something down the line? Yes. And then they could supplant whoever was in the secondary rotation. I just like that there's some competitive field in Chicago now. Like, you have talent that goes deep, which means competition in training camp, which means competition over the course of the regular season. There's just a lot to like there. I mean, hell, look, Javonte Green, for example, who is going to be the third string small forward, insanely athletic, fights and scraps like hell, defensively is really solid. Like, nobody wants to go up against him in practice. Like, he is going to somehow, some way squeeze out minutes for himself because he's just that type of guy. So, I don't know. I'm not saying that the Bulls have the greatest depth in the NBA or anything ridiculous like that, but I do think this ideology that the Bulls have no depth is just flat out wrong. And I'm seeing it all over. Oh, the Bulls have no depth. It's just completely untrue.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think Derrick Jones Jr. is only going to help in that regard. Again, you're not relying on him to play a major role, but given his athleticism alone, pairing him with that many guys who can create, like, just send him flying to the rim every time.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, you nailed it. When we talked about Derrick Jones Jr., I think a couple years ago, I think you and I floated the idea of, what about turning him into a small ball center? Remember? Like, just set screens, or even just as a, like, no, not just setting screens, but like set screens, but also just run the perimeter and fill the lane. Just have him running all the time. Make sure he's in front of the pack. Just send him oops and make sure that he gets deep rim protection or rim position. Throw the ball, see what happens. Like, I just like the versatility. And also, Bryan, what I'm really intrigued about, when you look at that roster right now, outside of maybe Marko Simonovic, there isn't that traditional power forward. It's Patrick Williams in the starting unit and Derrick Jones Jr. in the second. Guys who, at least 5 years ago, would have been completely pigeonholed into being full-time threes.
Yeah, or tweeners.
Or tweeners. Like, yes, I love this. This is the Bulls are finally a modern team. And we've been waiting on this. I remember a couple of years ago, we didn't even record. You and I were just, shooting the shit. I think after an episode or something, and you were like, "I don't understand why the Bulls always being this traditionalist." And this was under Garpax. Like, they always wanted the two bigs. They wanted one guard to like be the thing. They wanted one guy to create everything, and it just never worked out. Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley has, in a span of a little over a year, almost a year and a half, completely flipped everything over. I am just super impressed with how they did it, because Garpax didn't leave a lot of assets in the cupboard whatsoever. Kevin Farragut on Twitter has been all over this. Like, Garpax left Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley in a really crappy situation. And Bulls fans had more or less resigned themselves to, you know what? This is going to take a while, because like, you can't work without assets. Somehow they did. I think Arturas Karnisovas, depending on how this is going to work out with Lonzo and DeMar, I think he should be in conversation of like early conversations of executive of the year, just because he turned no assets whatsoever into this. That's
fair. I mean, I have a feeling Sean Marks is going to win it. As you know, typically, like, executive of the year gets awarded a year or two too late sometimes.
Right.
And he'll get it for signing Kevin Durant to an extension, even though the big move was getting Kevin Durant. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll save that
for James Harden. That kind of matters as well. Maybe.
Right. They got Patty Mills, I guess, but no. Well,
and look, if they get Isaiah Harden signed as well, it's game over. It's game over.